Job. That name has carried a weight through the centuries that few could bear. In the sands of the ancient Middle East, before the kings of Israel, before the prophecies and promises, lived a man whose story didn't begin with war or with miracles. It began with silence. A silence that was broken when heaven decided to test the worth of one righteous man's faith. The land of Uz was a real place, vast, remote, marked by contrasts between arid mountains and fertile plains. A region where nomadic tribes and merchants crossed paths, and where, even amid widespread idolatry, one man stood out for his unwavering integrity. Job was not a prophet. He was not a priest. He was an ordinary man. But his life held a kind of righteousness that all of heaven recognized. While many turned their eyes to the idols of the earth, Job lived with his heart fixed on the God of heaven. Yes, he was prosperous, the owner of flocks, land, and a large family. But what sustained his household wasn't gold or the number of servants, it was his reverent fear of the Creator. He was blameless and upright. And, as the text says, he turned away from evil. And yet, even with such an exemplary life, he would be crushed. The story of Job is not a comfortable one. It doesn't begin with triumph, nor does it end with easy answers. It is a story that dismantles human logic and reveals a profound secret, that suffering is not always punishment, and that sometimes, it is righteousness itself that leads us into the desert. What happened to Job was not the result of chance, nor of human cruelty. It was God Himself who presented him. It was God Himself who said to the adversary, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And there, among the sons of God and the accuser, an invisible war began. Not because of sin, but because of faith. In this journey, we will pass through emotional ruins, griefs that won't heal, friendships that disappoint, and silences that seem endless. But we will also uncover a powerful truth, one that is revealed only in the dust and ashes, that true faith does not depend on explanations, it depends on trust. And even when everything is lost, still, God remains. In the land of Uz, where caravans moved through dust and distant hills, lived a man whose life was, in human eyes, blameless. His name was Job. And while many sought prosperity as a sign of divine approval, Job treasured the presence of God as his true wealth. He was a complete man. Not because of what he owned, but because of who he was before the Lord. Job held no religious titles. He didn't lead armies. He didn't prophesy before crowds. But he was a man of integrity. And that was enough for heaven. Scripture spares no praise. There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Job, chapter 1, verse 1. For qualities, simple in form, but rare in substance. His wealth was astonishing. 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys. He had many servants, and his household was constantly bustling. But the most active movement there was prayer. Job prayed for his children, interceded for them after every feast, offering sacrifices just in case they sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Job, chapter 1, verse 5. He didn't wait for sin to appear, he anticipated it in love. 7 sons, 3 daughters. Job wasn't just wealthy, he was a present, sensitive, and watchful father. His home was a place of harmony. And that wasn't born of chance, but of intention. At that time, most men measured success by the size of their land and flocks. But Job measured by righteousness. He was respected among men, but more than that, he was remembered in heaven. And that's when the scene shifts. Without warning, the narrator takes us to a realm invisible to human eyes, the heavenly court. A solemn scene. The sons of God present themselves before the Creator. Among them, Satan. He doesn't appear with horns or a mystical aura. He shows up as the accuser, the same one who has questioned intentions and sown doubt since Eden. God speaks with authority, Where have you come from? And Satan replies coldly, from roaming through the earth and walking back and forth on it. He walks. He observes. He searches. But he does not marvel. He scans humanity in search of flaws, not faith. Then God confronts him with a name. Not just any name, but the name of a man who embodied faithfulness in the midst of corruption. Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one on earth like him, a blameless and upright man, who fears God and shuns evil. These words aren't just a description. They are a presentation. God places Job in the spotlight. He praises him. He exalts him. Not before the angels, but before the accuser. Satan replies with scorn. He doesn't deny the description, but he questions the motivation. Does Job fear God for nothing? And he continues, haven't you put a hedge around him? Haven't you blessed the work of his hands? His possessions have multiplied. Take that away, and see if he won't curse you to your face. The accusation is clear. Job's faith is interest-based. A transaction. A contract. A reflection of prosperity, not trust. But God, knowing the depths of his servant's heart, permits the test. Very well, then, everything he has is in your power. But on the man himself do not lay a finger. This isn't abandonment. It's trust. God sets boundaries. And he allows only what he knows Job can endure. Not to destroy him, but to reveal something not even the angels had yet seen, the faith of a man who loves God for who he is, not for what he gives. Satan departs. And the invisible war begins. On earth, everything seems the same. Job's children prepare a feast. The servants tend the fields. The breeze blows softly. But in the heavens, tension builds. The enemy doesn't hesitate. He plans, calculates, strikes. What follows will be a cascade of losses no human mind could process. Job, unaware of it all, continues with his daily routine. He doesn't hear the heavenly dialogue. He doesn't see the shadows approaching. But what he has will slowly begin to be taken away. And yet, in this first chapter, the most powerful moment isn't Job's wealth or his reputation. It's the fact that it was God himself who presented him to the enemy. That changes everything. Many believe that being righteous is a shield against suffering. But Job will become living proof that sometimes, it is righteousness itself that invites conflict. God didn't choose a sinner to be tested. He chose the best. Not because he doubted him, but because he knew he could trust him. This is the kind of faith that upholds the world. That challenges heaven. That confronts hell. And when the first messenger crosses Job's doorstep with news of chaos, it won't be the end. It will be only the beginning of a revelation that would echo through generations. It was a day like any other. The sun was likely crossing the sky slowly over the land of Uz. Job's servants were out in the field. The animals grazed in safety. His children were enjoying yet another feast together, as they often did. Nothing suggested that the world of this righteous man was about to collapse. But while the earth followed its routine, heaven had already been shaken. Permission had been granted. And now, the enemy would not waste time. Tragedy does not arrive slowly. It comes in waves, like hammer blows to a solid structure until everything gives way. A messenger runs to Job, breathless, pale, terror etched across his face. We were plowing with the oxen and the donkeys were grazing nearby when the Sabaeans attacked. They took everything. They killed the servants with the sword. I alone escaped to tell you. Before he finishes speaking, another arrives. His words trip over his breath. Fire of God fell from heaven. It burned the sheep, and the servants, everything was consumed. I alone survived. There is no time to react. A third messenger appears, nearly collapsing. The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and stormed the fields. They took all the camels. Killed more servants. I alone escaped. Job tries to make sense of it. But there is no time. A fourth messenger bursts in, desperate. Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house. A strong wind came from the desert. It struck the four corners of the house. It collapsed. They are all dead. Silence. What do you do when the ground disappears beneath your feet? When there is no more structure, no more logic, no more comfort? Job was being stripped of everything he had built and everything he loved. No property remained. No inheritance. No children. The heart of any man would have shattered. And what Job does is not deny the pain. It's not to act coldly. He tears his robe. He falls to the ground. He bows down. And there, among ashes and tears, he worships. Yes. He worships. And then he utters one of the most powerful phrases in all of faith's history. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job, chapter 1, verse 21, there is no revolt. No accusation. Only the surrender of someone who knows that everything he owns belongs, above all, to God. Job doesn't understand why. But he acknowledges the author of his life. He doesn't grasp the process, but he refuses to abandon the relationship. His pain is real, but so is his faith. And at that moment, we understand what it means to be a true servant. It's not someone who serves while everything is going well. It's someone who remains faithful even when everything is gone. And the sacred text records it with precision. In all this, Job did not sin nor charge God with wrongdoing. Job, chapter 1, verse 22, it's hard to imagine a greater pain. Within hours, Job became a man with no wealth, no servants, no children. But not without faith. What sustained him was invisible. It wasn't in the fields or in the banquet halls. It was within him. And that faith, which seemed unnecessary in times of abundance, now revealed itself as his only anchor. Job's faith wasn't built on cliches or hollow optimism. It was built on surrender. On reverence. On humility. He didn't demand explanations. He didn't insist on answers. He simply acknowledged that life is fragile, but God is eternal. Many would have cursed. Others would have given up. But Job endured. And heaven, which had just heard the enemy's accusation, now witnessed a scene that would echo through eternity, a man stripped of everything, worshiping. Job's life became an altar. There was no temple, no music, no crowd. But there was reverence. There was surrender. There was praise. He didn't understand the reason, but he revealed the secret. True faith does not depend on stability. It reveals itself in chaos. When the pillars collapse and the house falls, what remains is what truly matters. And for Job, what remained was enough, God. The one who gave, was still worthy of praise even after he had taken away. And that is what makes this chapter so powerful. Job is not a mythological hero. He is a real man. With real pain. With real grief. But with unshakable faith. Not because he didn't suffer, but because even in suffering, he trusted. The invisible war continues. The enemy is not satisfied. But for now, all of heaven has seen what hell doubted. There is a kind of faith that does not bend to circumstances. And Job was the bearer of that faith. Heaven had witnessed a mourning man, worshiping. Hell, on the other hand, did not remain silent. Job's faith had withstood the loss of possessions, servants, and children. But now, the enemy wanted to go deeper. He wanted to cross the final frontier, the man's own body. The scene repeats itself. Once again, the sons of God present themselves before the Lord. And once again, among them, comes Satan. As if insisting on his failure, he returns with a defiant look in the same cynical routine, from roaming through the earth and walking back and forth on it. The Lord, with a majesty that never needs to prove itself, asks, "Have you considered my servant Job? A man who is blameless and upright, who fears God and shuns evil. He still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without cause." God once again exalts Job's character. Now not as a theoretical righteous man, but as one who has endured pain and remains standing. But Satan, relentless, retorts, skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life. But stretch out your hand and strike his bones and flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. The insinuation is brutal. What is a man's character worth if his body is in ruins? The accuser claims that Job's faith only survived because he still had his health, that true loyalty would only be proven when pain entered the flesh. And God, once more, permits it. Not out of cruelty, but because he knew the root of Job's faith. And he knew that even a body in ashes would not extinguish the flame of trust. Very well, he is in your hands. But spare his life. Satan leaves. There is no compassion. No mercy. He does not hesitate. He strikes Job with painful sores, from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Open wounds. Unbearable itching. Constant pain. Fever. Disgust. All at once. The man who once sat among leaders and led servants with dignity now sits in ashes, holding a piece of broken pottery, scraping at his wounds. It is hard to imagine anything more humiliating, more isolating, more devastating. Job is alive, but his body has become his prison. And it is at this moment that an unexpected voice rises. The closest voice. The voice of his own wife. She had suffered too. She had also lost everything. Their children, their servants, their stability. And now, she watched the man she loved turn into a shadow of himself. Disfigured. Silent. In constant pain. She approaches and says, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." This is not just a statement of unbelief. It is a cry of despair. A distorted plea from someone who can no longer bear the suffering. To her, death seemed like relief. Faith, a cruel burden. But Job, still covered in sores, responds with the calm of someone who knows the essence of faith. "You speak like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God, and not also accept adversity?" He doesn't insult her. He doesn't condemn her. He simply shows that his faith is not selective. That the same God who blesses also has the authority to allow pain. Job understood what many still don't, that suffering is not the absence of God, but part of the mystery of existence. That there is a purpose even when the plan is still hidden. And the sacred text reminds us once again, in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Job, chapter 2, verse 10, made of the pain, nor the emotional pressure, nor the abandonment. Nothing was able to extract a curse from him. Nothing broke his integrity. But now he is alone. Alone in body. Alone in soul. Alone in spirit. And it is in this state that he is visited by his three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They come from afar. Men of renown, known for their wisdom. When they see Job from a distance, they barely recognize him. They tear their robes. Throw dust on their heads. Sit beside him for 7 days and 7 nights, without saying a single word. Because sometimes, suffering is so deep, that silence is the only way to honor it. Job does not speak. His friends do not speak. Only time passes. And with it, the pain settles. The wound does not heal, but it bleeds more slowly. It is in this space between the wounded body and the silent soul that Job's faith keeps breathing. Even among the shards, the ashes, and the abandonment, he stands firm. But something is changing. The pain is sinking deeper. Not just into the bones, but into the heart. And in the next chapter, he will break the silence. And when Job speaks, heaven, earth, and even pain itself will have to listen. 7 days. 7 nights. Job, in silence, sitting among the ashes. 3 men around him, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, also silent, without strength to speak. Because there are pains that don't seek explanations. There are sufferings so sharp that any word becomes an insult. But time demands a voice. And at last, Job's silence is broken. It is not a scream against God. It is not an accusation toward heaven. It is a lament. An existential cry. An open wound overflowing. May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said, a boy is born. Job does not curse God. But he curses his own birth. As if trying to rewind time and erase his existence, he plunges into the valley of anguish and declares that it would have been better never to have lived. He doesn't understand. He can't see. And he can't take it anymore. Why did I not perish at birth? Why were there knees to receive me? Why breasts to nurse me? He longs for forgetfulness. For non-existence. For the end before the beginning. Job feels trapped in a life that has become too heavy a burden. The same man worshipped on the day of loss, now drowns in the pain of what remains. It is not weakness. It is humanity. The suffering did not break his faith, but it exposed his inner cracks. It revealed that even the strongest also cry. And that faithfulness does not cancel out lament. Job cries out for meaning, for understanding, for mercy. But what he finds is the echo of his own words returning empty. And it is in this abyss of despair that his friends decide to speak. The first is Eliphaz the Temanite. He begins with respect. He recalls that Job, in the past, was a source of comfort to many. A man who strengthened weary hands, who steadied weak knees. But now, he says, when struck himself, Job collapses. Is not your reverence for God your confidence, and your hope the integrity of your ways? Eliphaz implies that if Job is suffering, then guilt must be present. He shares a vision he had, in which a spirit told him that no man is pure before God. None are righteous. And so, suffering must be a form of divine correction. Blessed is the one whom God corrects, Eliphaz declares, do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. The words are not cruel, but they are cold. Like diagnoses delivered at a bedside, without touch, without compassion. Eliphaz does not realize that there is a gap between what is true and the right time to say it. Job listens, but he finds no comfort. He replies, and his response is an even deeper lament. He does not deny that God is just, but he questions whether justice is truly being manifested. He does not blaspheme, but he also doesn't pretend to understand. If only my anguish could be weighed, and all my misery placed on the scales. He feels his words are carried away by the wind. That his friends do not listen. That his suffering is being analyzed, dissected, but not embraced. And then, with an open heart and tear-filled eyes, Job declares, what I long for most is that God would crush me, that he would let loose his hand and cut me off. That would still be my comfort. He doesn't want to live just for the sake of it. He wants meaning. And not finding it, he longs for the end. But faith is still there. A trembling faith. A dying hope. A fragile thread tied to heaven that, though worn, has not yet snapped. Bildad is the second to speak. And his approach is even harsher. Without softening his words, he suggests that Job's children died because of their sins. That God is just, and if destruction came, then guilt must have preceded it. He says, God does not reject a blameless person, nor strengthen the hands of evildoers. And he encourages Job to seek God sincerely, to repent, to return to the right path. For if he does, God will restore his life. But Bildad makes the same mistake. He tries to apply a formula to what is mystery. He tries to fit heaven into human reasoning. And just like Eliphaz, he speaks without listening. Job hears it all in silence. But inside, his heart bleeds even more. He knows he hasn't sinned. Not in a way that would justify all this. And that only deepens the dilemma. Because pain does not come with an explanation. And God's silence weighs more than his friend's words. Job is tired. Wounded in body, soul, and faith. He hasn't abandoned his trust, but it hangs by the threads of hope. With every word spoken, every veiled accusation, he feels more alone. But there is one thing no one can take from him. A silent but firm conviction that will begin to sprout in the next chapters. A seed germinating in the valley of pain. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. Job, chapter 19, verse 25, that certainty is still forming. It hasn't been revealed. But it already exists, hidden beneath the ashes. Because deep down, Job knows, even without understanding, there is still a God who sees him. And for now, that is enough to keep breathing. The days go by. The pain doesn't fade. And Job's friends keep speaking, trying to explain the unexplainable. Zophar, the most impulsive of the three, now takes the floor. His tone is impatient. He believes Job speaks too much, that he's exaggerating in his complaints. And without hesitation, he throws out sharp words. God demands less from you than you deserve. Zophar is convinced that hidden sin is at play. That no one suffers this much without cause. For him, theology is simple, suffering is punishment. And if there is punishment, there must be guilt. And if there is guilt, all that's left is to be quiet and repent. If you devote your heart and stretch out your hands to God, then you will lift up your face without shame, you will stand firm and fear nothing. But his words bring no comfort. Job's pain doesn't come from a lack of religion, it comes from a lack of meaning. He's already sought God. Already prayed. Already worshipped. Already kept silent. And now, even among wounds and arguments, he keeps searching. Job doesn't respond in anger, but in release. He no longer seeks to convince anyone. He just wants to be heard by God. Oh, that I knew where to find him, that I might come to his court. He desires an audience with the Most High. Not to accuse him, but to understand. To plead. To pour out his soul. Because the words of men only add confusion. But one word from God would bring light. And then, between the shards of human logic and divine silence, a sentence rises from deep within his spirit. A truth that surpasses his friend's theology. A revelation none of them had spoken, but that Job, alone, discovers in his pain. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. Job, chapter 19, verse 25, that sentence changes everything. Job is still in ruins. Still not restored. Still wounded. But now he sees something. Feels something. Realizes that God's justice is not absent, it is simply waiting for the right time to rise. And more than that, it is alive. Not a concept, an idea, or a moral system. A person. A redeemer. The word Job uses, goel, is the Hebrew term for one who rescues, who buys back, who redeems the afflicted relative. He is the legal deliverer. And in that phrase, Job declares his faith that someone, a divine representative, will come and bring justice for him. It's not just hope. It's certainty. Without knowing it, Job prophesies Christ. He doesn't see the face. He doesn't know the name. But he sees the figure. He sees a Redeemer rising from eternity to intervene in time. And that, even if for only a few moments, sustains him. Because now Job understands, God's justice doesn't have to happen on his timeline, but it will come. The revelation, however, doesn't end the pain. His friends continue. The arguments go on. Eliphaz accuses Job of wickedness. He speaks harshly, listing hypothetical sins, that Job oppressed the poor, ignored the needy, stole land from the afflicted. Heavy accusations, and unfounded. Reconcile yourself with God, he says. And peace will come. Once again, as if Job had turned away from God. As if his suffering were a sign of rebellion. As if pain canceled out faith. But Job knows his own heart. He knows that even without understanding, he still belongs to the Lord. And so he replies, though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. Job's faith is paradoxical. He doesn't deny that God might be behind the pain. But even so, he doesn't run from him, he runs to him. That is the kind of faith that survives the wilderness. That doesn't need explanations to keep existing. Bildad speaks again. He emphasizes God's purity and man's impurity. Says not even the moon is pure in God's eyes. And that, compared to divine greatness, man is a worm. Job doesn't contest God's greatness. But he seeks more than that. He wants closeness. He wants justice. He wants to be heard. And even without the strength to rise to heaven, he cries out from where he is. At the same time as he laments, he defends his integrity. He lists his righteousness in detail. Speaks of kindness to the needy, of hospitality, of honesty. He's not boasting. He's begging for someone to see that his life doesn't contradict his faith. But nothing changes. Not in the body. Not in the soul. Until a new character enters the scene. His name is Elihu. He is young. And until now, he has remained silent, out of respect for the elders. But now, faced with the stubbornness of the friends and Job's growing despair, he decides to speak. Elihu doesn't repeat the accusations. He doesn't try to explain everything. But he brings a different perspective. He says that God may use suffering as instruction. That not all pain is punishment, sometimes it's correction. Sometimes it's mercy. Sometimes it's a call to humility. God speaks in many ways, but man does not always perceive it. Elihu points to the greatness of God, but also to his teaching. To a God who speaks through dreams, through pain, through revelation, and who, above all, desires man's good. He doesn't minimize the suffering, but he places it within a greater purpose. And for the first time, the words begin to calm Job's heart. Because they aren't just answers. They are invitations to trust. Doors into mystery. And Job begins to understand. God's justice is not like man's. God's time is not like ours. And his voice often hides behind silence. But even when God doesn't speak, he is present. And when the Redeemer finally rises, the pain will not be the end. It will be the beginning of a much greater revelation. After so many speeches, laments, accusations, and human attempts to explain suffering, finally, heaven moves. But God doesn't show up with formulas. He doesn't come with answers to all the whys. He doesn't offer explanations for every loss, every tear, every scar. Instead, he speaks. And when God speaks, it's not to satisfy curiosity. It's to reveal his glory. The text says that the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. There is no softness. No immediate relief. There is wind, power, voice, and questions. Many questions. God doesn't justify himself. He interrogates, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird yourself like a man, I will question you, and you shall answer me. And then begins a series of questions no man can answer. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Who marked off its dimensions? Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? God describes creation, the control of the universe, the movement of the stars, the life of wild animals, the rising of the sun, the path of light, the storehouses of snow, the fury of the seas, all to show Job, and us, that God's plan is far greater than our capacity to understand. The Lord is not belittling Job. He is lifting his vision. He is saying, with every question, I am God. And you can trust me, even without understanding. Job listens. Not with the ears that heard Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar's arguments, but with the Spirit. With a heart that, though wounded, is still sensitive to the voice of its Creator. And he replies. Not with defense. Not with pride. But with reverence. I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. And then, with deep humility, he says, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Job, chapter 42, verse 5, this is the true restoration. Before health. Before possessions. Before family. Job has an encounter with God. An encounter that doesn't explain, but transforms. The pain doesn't vanish, but it loses the power to distort reality. Because now Job has seen the greatness, the holiness, the wisdom, and above all, the presence of God. Job repents. Not because he sinned to deserve the suffering, but because he now understands the depth of what it means to be dust before eternity. He surrenders. And there, in the dust, heaven smiles. Then God turns to Job's friends and rebukes them. My anger burns against you and your two friends, because you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. They, who tried to explain God, failed. Job, who only wanted to find him, was accepted. God commands them to offer sacrifices, and says Job will pray for them. The same man who was wounded, slandered, misunderstood, now becomes an intercessor. He prays, and God forgives them. Because true spirituality is not measured by arguments, but by reconciliation. And then, the Lord restored Job's fortunes. But the restoration is not a fairy tale ending. It is the result of a profound transformation. He receives twice as much as he had before, 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 oxen teams, and 1,000 donkeys. God also gives him again 7 sons and 3 daughters. And these daughters are described as the most beautiful in the land. Job gives them an inheritance alongside their brothers, something unheard of in that culture. Because when someone sees God, they start seeing others differently too. Job lives another 140 years. Sees his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren. And dies old, and satisfied with life. But Job's true inheritance isn't in numbers. It's in the phrase that still echoes in every suffering soul, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Job's story isn't about losses, nor about answers. It's about transformation. God never explained to Job the reason for his suffering, but he led him to a place where seeing God became more important than understanding everything. And maybe that is the greatest secret of faith. God doesn't owe us explanations, but he offers us revelation. And when he reveals himself, that is enough. If you find yourself among dust and ashes, like Job did, if loss has silenced you, if pain has driven you away from everyone, and the silence of heaven has wounded you more than the words of men, today, hear this truth, your Redeemer lives. And in the right time, he will rise. You don't need to understand everything, but you can trust him. It's not about explanations. It's about presence. It's not about going back to what was. It's about seeing as you've never seen. Today, the challenge is simple. Speak to God even without understanding. Worship even without strength. And trust, because he is still writing your final chapter.